start doing our introductions because I see we on the just 2 minutes before 4. So let me just see if we've got Professor de Villiers. Are you have you joined us? Did you manage to get on?
Yep, I'm with you. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much for joining us. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Strauss & Company. This is, I suppose, season 3 of our virtual talkabouts, and we've started to introduce new sections in our regular Zoom programming. And Museum Moments is this is the first in the installation of Museum Moments that we're introducing, and I suppose it's provided, as Khanyisile and I were talking about, an opportunity to bring the museum to the public in a way that in a period of sustained isolation, both physical and I suppose mentally in a way. This has provided a window for to the outside world, where and also a window into our own, into our own desks and couches and iPhones to connect. And as Strauss & Co, we thought this is a wonderful opportunity to branch out to those constituents that really are, I suppose, underlooked and very often neglected parts of our social and creative and cultural infrastructure, which is museums. So without laboring the point, I'd like to proceed with the introductions. Today we're joined by the Rector of Stellenbosch University, Professor Wim de Villiers. Thank you very much for joining us. And Khanyisile Mbongwa, the Chief Curator of the Stellenbosch Triennale. Dr. de Villiers, Professor de Villiers, beg your pardon. I'd at this point like to thank you for joining us and open the floor for the introduction to today's Zoom panel. Thanks so much for giving us a part of your very busy time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthew, and thanks for the opportunity. I really welcome this, and I want to congratulate you on starting this initiative. So I think this is a great opportunity to highlight Stellenbosch University Museum. We're very proud of this, and you're going to see some examples of the permanent exhibition later on in your presentation. We've got a fantastic exhibition on or works by Maggie, Laubser, Paul de Toy, Christo, Coetzee, really extensive collections of that. But this specific one, I'm really pleased that we can talk about, and that we have the curators here to take us through this, because I was looking back at my notes when I opened this exhibition on the 20th of February. It seems like a lifetime ago, and how things have changed in the interim. We're really in a different universe. But really, this exhibition that was opened from the vault, and I looked at the things that a few of my remarks there, and well, it's such a stunning exhibition. It shows great works, beautiful works, valuable works. These have been seldom seen in public, and actually never ever seen before together. These are works from the vaults of Stellenbosch University and Fort Hare, both universities that are more than a century old. And I opened the exhibition together with the Vice Chancellor of Fort Hare, Professor Sekela Bushlungu. And what I really appreciate what the curators did is they didn't do just what could have been very simple and which could have been expected, because really focusing on the differences between these two universities. We know the background very well, the same higher education landscape, but for much of our history, really, we might have been on different planets, really. So Stellenbosch University, I mean, it's obvious, Stellenbosch University having been associated with Afrikaner nationalism in its earliest days, Fort Hare, a bastion of African nationalism. So Stellenbosch produced Herzog, Malan, Verwoerd, and I must add, Van Zyl Slabberbuyers through Degenaar, very critical voices, Afrikaner voices in those days. Whilst Fort Hare, a bastion there, producing Mandela, Tutu, Sobukwe, Tambo, Matthews, Mugabe, Kahunda. So these art collections at our two institutions really built up over the decades reflect our different journeys. So it would have been, as I said, very easy to do the obvious and focus on the difference, but that's not what they did. And that's what was so exciting and wonderful to experience that evening as well when we opened the exhibition, as also as part of the inaugural Stellenbosch Triennale. Of course, we hope that many more people would see this, because it really talks so much to it. But it really sought out the connections and looked for answers in unexpected places, and really that it made us see beyond the differences and what we have in common, and that together we are better. It sounds like a bit of a cliche, but absolutely, it's really, it showed it very nicely in these, I think very, as I said, rarely exhibited works. So it also, that's the collection from the two vaults of the university's art collections. But it also, there's a lesson in that, overarching lesson in it for us as universities, because there are already links between Stellenbosch and Fort Hare, staff working together, student groups visiting each other's campuses, and the exhibition is another example of closer collaboration between the two institutions. And I really express the hope, and am firmly committed to that this it's not just an example of a shallow, superficial togetherness, but it's a meaningful partnership to help us address the real challenges that we face in this now very new landscape that we inhabit. And that I look forward to what the curators say. And again, I want to compliment them on what they've achieved. I really enjoyed, and I visited the exhibition on a number of times before we had to close down. I thought it's lovely. So I look forward to what they have to say. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Professor Villiers. And so, with this point, I'd like to just give a quick observation about the sort of historical context that this exhibition fills. And it was, I suppose, celebrating the inaugural Stellenbosch Triennale, which in and of itself, I think, is quite an interesting, necessary move to reorientate Stellenbosch, I suppose, as a cultural hub, and provide a space to, I suppose, recontextualize the point of these points of creativity that and I suppose deep archive that rest in the histories of these institutions. So with that being said, I'd like to use this opportunity to introduce Khanyisile Mbongwa, Chief Curator of the Stellenbosch Triennale, and she's going to be speaking to Mike and Gcotyelwa, speaking to us a little bit about the exhibition, about the exhibition from the vault, which form part of the triennale. But I think, Khanyisile, it's fantastic to have you here. And I think just to begin to be able to draw the picture of how from the vault fits in, can you speak to us a little bit about briefly the conception and your role in the Stellenbosch Triennale? Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for inviting us and for hosting us. So when I was asked to curate the Triennale, the Stellenbosch Triennale, I really wanted to figure out how we do that in a context of where we are right now as a continent. And also really looking at it from a perspective of how Africans work with time. And that time for Africans is not a linear concept. And because the past and the present and the future are seen as constantly intersecting and intertwining and in conversation. And so it was, using that kind of perspective, like how I think about the exhibitions and can anyone?
Sorry, can you see that you just seem to have
everyone is frozen.
You're breaking from my side.
I think, can you see, let's just try and turn off your video for a second, sorry, and then it might just help with the bandwidth as we go. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to, I suppose, Mike, are you here?
I'm here. I'm here. How are you, Matthew?
Very good, thanks. Mike, I'll just, I'm going to use this opportunity quickly while Khanyisile just sort out some connectivity things to introduce you as one of the co-curators with Gcotyelwa of From the Boat, From the Vault exhibition. And I suppose, just can you give us some introduction as to the conception of the exhibition and how it fitted into the Stellenbosch Triennale, and I suppose some of the interesting points of collaboration between these two, as we were hearing, historically, different universities.
Thank you, Matthew, and thanks for the invite. So, From the Vault formed part of the exhibition of the Triennale, and the theme of the Triennale was "Tomorrow There Will Be More of Us." So immediately we had to work within the framework of that theme of "Tomorrow There Will Be More of Us," and we looked at the two collections, the Fortier collection and the Stellenbosch collection. Both come from universities that are over 100 years old. Very sort of like fractured histories, binary histories, Stellenbosch University, sort of like the bastion of Afrikaner nationalism, and Fortier University, the bastion of sort of like African nationalism. But we wanted to immediately suspend that history because it wouldn't fit within the theme of "Tomorrow There'll Be More of Us." The Triennale was all about tomorrow. It was all about futuring. So we felt that trying to, spend time looking at the past, looking at, processes of, who collected which artworks within the Stellenbosch University, or who collected what kind of artworks within the Fortier University would not really be a fruitful exercise for us. So immediately we thought about futuring. We had, and some of it was actually quite an interesting exhibition to have because of the many partners that were involved in making the exhibition. We had very many challenges in making the exhibition, actually, because at some point it looked like the Fortier collection just did not want to come to Stellenbosch. We even had, there were protests at Fortier University. There were floods at some point. So it was really, really difficult to get the two together. And it seemed like it wasn't just going to be an easy process to have these two in conversation. But essentially, we wanted to blur the two collections so that any person who actually came to the exhibition could not be able to tell immediately which works belonged to the Fortier collection or which works belonged to the Stellenbosch University collection. So the blurring of the lines. Sorry, yeah.
Well, I just must interrupt you because it was a fantastic question and observation that we've had, I suppose, coming through. Here's Khanyisile coming back now. That we've seen is, I suppose, this ability of these kinds of exhibitions to canonicize these works. And I suppose, becoming, as our art history is in the collective writing at the moment. How did you feel that this was an exhibition that was writing contemporary South African art history, I suppose?
Yeah, writing contemporary South African art history. It was so difficult because everything else around the Triennale was fresh. The other two exhibitions, the main curators exhibition had new works. There was another exhibition that looked at young contemporary upcoming artists from the continent, which had new works, and we had old works. So we essentially were positioned in the past, and to bring that into the present, we had to do quite a number of things. So if you go through the slide, for example, I'll speak a little bit about the exhibition making process. Yeah. Firstly, we had to do the
two rectors, I think, just so yeah. people have got some context, and then I believe that's a Strauss Co representative of our chairperson who's in the audience, Mr. Frank Kilborn.
But Kello, you can also jump in here. You're the co-curator here. So that image, for example, we had to the space that we were having the exhibition is the Stellenbosch Museum. How do we make it a contemporary space? So painting the space was really, really important to us. we were not allowed to use all of the spaces in the museum. We were given 4 spaces only to use, so we had to make these spaces distinct. So we felt that we had to paint, the spaces that we were going to use. That was not easy. It required us to really, play like a really, really negotiating role with the museum, because the museum is a historical building. You're not supposed to paint it. There are all, these kinds of politics around using that space. So that's the first image. If you can move to the next image, please. Yeah, and that's the 4th-year collection when it arrived, actually. This is probably 4 days before the exhibition was supposed to open. So the whole 4th-year collection actually travels as a whole. You can't pick and choose to say, I want to use 50 works, and then they transport 50 works. It comes as everything. So we had the whole 4th-year collection at our disposal in one of the rooms that we were actually going to exhibit. So we were literally working night and day to pick and choose the works that we're going to use, and that's part of the collection. Gcotyelwa, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, just to answer the question about how we were writing, this kind of old history into the present. I think, again, having to work in the museum, we have to think that the museum is not a neutral space as well, As Mike was saying, that a lot of things were just like, the painting has not have been done probably for the past 10 years. So we had to do something that was new, that was fresh, as a way of, again, giving people a different perspective about particularly the works from 4-tier collection, because they have sort of a different perspective. People view it differently, as in there's this term like traditional art, or tribal art. So as a way of mitigating, and also just negotiating that space, color was one of our interventions. So I think for us, just having the work in the space that has never been exhibited before was really like reinforcing it into the present, and people to acknowledge that as much as it was done in probably 10 or 20 years ago, or 40 years ago, but it's still very much the nuances, the narratives, or the history that the artists were dealing with, they're very much present, and they influence the present and the future generation. Yeah.
I think, can you see?
Am I clear? Am I clear?
You're 100% clear. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, fantastic. I think Khanyisile joined us back again. So there we go. Slight glitch, but everybody's still here. Khanyisile, how are you?
I'm back.
Cool. All right.
Back.
Hold on. Okay.
Yes. Am I talking now? Okay. So
Yes. Sorry, I was just going to leave it.
I don't know where everyone spoke, because I lost everyone completely. So I think, when from a broader curatorial perspective, from the vault, for me, what is important, because I'm interested as a curator into museum collections and how we can use the museum as a public space, as a time capsule, as space that produces culture, to really think about, and not only think, but also imagine and find ways of talking about and acting from spaces of reparation, repatriation, really looking into genocide collections, and really engaging with museums as from an ancestral time, and trying to browse through the historical acquisitions, and how museums over time, depending of course, their positionality, like which era we're looking at, how they were acquiring works and what were their reasons for acquiring works. And also really looking at what is sitting in their vaults, the works that are never seen, that are never experienced, that have been gathering dust for years. And what happens when we bring those work, into our contemporary space, like what kind of questions come out from that work, and how we can use that particular space to really reimagine and ask difficult questions about our past, but at the same time, in a parallel way, really reimagining new questions for our common futures. And when I invited Tigere, Mike, and Gcotyelwa to curate, I was very much interested in, sort of a speculative perspective in how we look into the past. How can we use the past to think from a speculative space rather than saying, well, we know what happened. We have all the facts, we have all the truth, so we're just gonna lay it out there. But like if we really work with the complexities and the nuances of how these particular works sit today. And for me, what was very fascinating was how absence is also evidence. The things that are not seen, the things that are lost, the unsaid things, and also that, to a large extent, the absence of women in these collections, the absence of Black women. And for me, that, it's almost like it's, we're asking a recurring question of like, where were the women during this time? What were they doing? Were there no women artists, or were people not collecting women artists at that time? So these are some of the questions for me that came up that sort of speak to like absence as a way of evidence, things that are missing, spaces that are lost. But what was also fascinating is that you can never close the gap. When there's a gap, there's a gap. You can never fill the gap. It's part of the story. It's part of the narrative. Hi, Matthew, are you there?
Hello? I was just muted. I beg your pardon.
Oh, because I can't see everyone, so I'm just like.
Okay. I'll start my video again. So I'm here. Do you know what's fascinating to me is, I suppose, where did you begin? And this is quite an interesting. Khanyisile, maybe I think, you in conversation with the curators, as the chief curator of the triennial, what were some of the prompts that you started receiving from the curators, and how did you go about starting to look at these two sort of previously diametrically opposed collections, and to start, how did you precisely blur those lines and start to have these kinds of conversations with the artworks? Can you speak us through some of those processes where the artworks started to speak to each other and these absences started to pronounce themselves?
And I think for me, the quest, is looking at curating as a form of cure. How do we cure ourselves from the woundedness? Like, we are dealing with a deep-seated woundedness in this country. And some of the collections in these museums represent that woundedness. And so that was my starting point. How do we work with the curatorial practice as a place of cure and healing? And then the question becomes how maybe we need to start from a place of self-reconciliation, when we reconcile with our own histories, as difficult as they may be. And so if we look at these two collections in a speculative perspective, maybe it's easier, in a non-beautiful way, to reach a space of self-reconciliation and really confront yourself. And so how do these collections, and this I think is what Gcotyelwa and Mike were confronted with, how do they work with collections that were sitting on polar opposites of reality? When these artists were making works, they were and in the middle of it was race. But how do we speculate differently? How do we engage with it from another perspective of speculation, and what will we get out of it? And so I think that's something Mike and Gcotyelwa would answer better, because they had to work with the collection itself, like they felt the work, they saw their work, they had to look at the title of the work and engage with that. And then of course, engage with Stellenbosch itself and the museum with all the history that it carries.
Yeah, just to jump in, I mean, talking about gaps and silences, it's something that even when we had our first meeting, trying to conceptualize the show, trying to speculate on it, basically, having not seen the works, having not visited the museum, especially the Stellenbosch Museum, and also having not gone into the Stellenbosch collection, or the storage rather. We sort of played around. I think we looked at this collection as the archive, like as a, formal documents that speaks of certain histories. And obviously when you're looking at it in that way, there are gaps, there are silences, And so when we now literally were to go into the storages, we went in there being aware and cognizant that there are certain, for example, when we speak of women artists, it's something that Kanye was very, like she said it in the beginning, like even when we were looking at the collection that was coming from Forte, like where are the women's, where are the women in this collection? So when we went there knowing that there's these gaps. And the question, I think, for both Mike and I was do we attempt, to fill in these gaps? But also knowing that when you try to bring up these silences, you are creating other silences. So there was a lot of that. When we're trying to fill the gap, you're creating another gap simultaneously. So I think it was quite challenging. And with Forte, we had to work with what we were given. There was no, we didn't have so much privilege like we did with the Stellenbosch collection to actually go into the vault and select works that we think actually, connects with the theme of the Triennale. But with the Forte, it was just those works, and then we had to make our own selection from them. But still, even with collection from the from the Stellenbosch, there were a lot of gaps, and those are the kind of interesting things. And also, I think our treatment of the show was to highlight them, was to bring them to the forefront and say, these are the gaps, and to allow now the viewers or the spectators or the audience to come and perhaps, and try to close those gaps. I don't know, Mike, if you wanna.
Yeah, I think just to jump in there quickly, I think these are very pertinent questions that we also asked to the audience and that we are still asking to the audience. So if you go through the slides, there's actually like some phrases that we put on the walls that ask these questions. I think there's a phrase that says, what happens to the colonial archive in decolonial time? It's not a question that we can ask ourselves, but it's also that we can answer ourselves, but it's also an open-ended question to everyone who will come to the exhibition to say, this is the time that we find ourselves in. How do we deal with this issue? What happens to the colonial archive in decolonial time? It's an open-ended question that everyone should sort of like start to engage with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was treating it as a site of inquiry, basically, that this is not a complete object. It's so much in conflict. There's so much gap. There's so much questions that when you leave, they haven't been answered. If you came with questions as an audience or as a spectator, as a member of the University Museum, perhaps you leave with more questions, sorry, Kanye.
No, I was just, no, it's fine. I was just going to jump into what Tigere was saying, or Mike was saying, and, that question about, what do you really do with colonial collections in a decolonizing context? And for me, that's a moment of emancipatory speculation. It's a way to practice emancipation, to ask yourself a difficult question in a way of, you're looking at the past, you're looking at the archive, you're looking at the museum, and trying to figure out ways to manifest a future that is common for all of us, rather than, the past is difficult. It's a very difficult past. And I think the silences, for me are like monuments. The silences that we found in this exhibition for me are monuments, the monuments that were never built, the names of people that were never said, the artists that we may never know. These are monuments, right? But how do we then navigate ourselves from that point? We might not really, the exhibition is not answering any questions, but it's asking us to have a difficult conversation about our history, a difficult conversation about our current moment, and how we're going to use these two, modes of time to really imagine ourselves into the future. And what future will that be, and who will we be into that future?
Yeah.
I think there's another, just to jump in last minute, there's another thing that we really thought about, the way that we hang the works. It's almost like salon type of hanging. And that was meant to actually destabilize the hierarchies.
Yes.
So if you see the first image, we've got a Juan Miro next to a Pemba. Historically, that would have been problematic, but we are like, if you look at the works, they look beautiful next to each other. So it makes you wonder, like, why have we been concerned with all these binaries and all these hierarchies? So we try to let the work speak for itself. So that also went into the way that we decided to hang the works, to sort of like blur these histories, to just put things that spoke to each other next to each other.
I mean, if you look even slides 29 and 30, you got your Cecil Scottness there, and then there's CBC. You look at the marking of I mean, the Scottness is it's a woodcut, and then the following slide it's more like a what is it called, woodcut on paper. But you look at the markings, they're very similar, but these people were educated from different. So the other one went to Rogue Strip, the other one was at Michaelis, So those are the kind of conversation we also tried to plot into this exhibition, because again, we cannot exhibit these works in a museum. Museum on its own, it's got, like I said, it's not a neutral space. So we had to kind of engage with what's already, the conversation that are happening globally within museum, within when it comes to like collection, labeling, and we had a what do you call it? A vitrine, which we took from the ethnographic section in the museum, because again, we're coming into this space and some of the things are not meant to be changed, and we said we cannot just like avoid, that we need to bring in these other conversation that are happening within the museum spaces, like Kanye was saying, to complicate the conversation. Because yes, it's about our history, it's about, but possibly, but most importantly, it's about our future. But again, what's really happening in our current museum context.
Matthew, can you go to slide 44? Just 43 and 44.
Okay, let me just get out of
here. And I think it's an important point that Gcotyelwa raised. But I think what was also interesting for this exhibition is that both Gcotyelwa and me, we are actually educators. So we were very much interested in making this space, this whole museum space, a space that is going to be attractive to young people. We had a whole plan around bringing in university students, high school students to come to the space. I think the slide next to, right next actually plays. It's a little video. I don't know if you can play it. So we actually brought students who were doing, studying post-colonialism, and they started picking people in Stellenbosch and asking interesting questions around what does it mean to be African? So, all these questions were meant to be, we really wanted to activate this space, to make it a space that is going to be a space of debate, a space of conversation, where people can come and really just hang out. We called this room the pause room, because we have 4 spaces in the exhibition. So we felt like it was too much. People needed a space where they could just relax, take a seat, enjoy the artworks. We had 2 Sekotos in this room, which anyone could come. You have a coffee, a meeting, do your tutorial in there, and literally be looking at 2 Sekotos, which is a real treat. So people had started to do things and activate the space.
So I've got an interesting question. We talk about, one of the interesting things for me at the moment is to grasp the shifting discourses of how we left with these archival residues of quite wonderful, very richly textured collections of history and moments. But so often in South Africa, we find, and Mike, Tigere, thanks so much for bringing the point up. You say, there was these amazing 2 Gerard Sekotos in the room, and, people could come. What is it about, I suppose, starting to appreciate our history differently with the reverence that we've got to these kinds of objects? I mean, Gerard Sekoto has started to really capture in the past 20 or 30 years has started to take his rightful place as one of the South African masters in you know, in the history of a South African canon. And we, you know, to breathe life into the importance of these kinds of works is, you know, for me, one of the ways that we navigate decolonizing this kind of discourse and decolonizing these collections is by imbuing these kinds of objects with the reverence that I think they deserve. What was the feeling of how do you treat these works hierarchically? Do you find these kinds of histories and as Gcotyelwa was saying, you know, in the silences, some voices start to speak louder. Can you talk about, I suppose, some of those difficulties of that come in celebrating these incredible works, as well as giving voice and space to the previously unheard?
Yeah, it was a good color. You can also jump in here, but it was so difficult to us because in this room we put two Sekotors next to each other because we really wanted young people, as you can see, to really appreciate, you know, the gravitas of the work, you know, and to really see them live, you know. But at the same time, we are also cognizant that literally in the other room we had put a you know, vinyl on the wall that actually said that, you know, we recognize the erasure and the silences and the absence of women in the exhibition. And it's so difficult because perhaps we can rectify that in new ways of collecting. I don't know if these two universities are still collecting. Maybe there needs to be some kind of, you know, it's controversial. Is there affirmative action around, you know, making sure that these collections also, you know, have got a balance in terms of women artists? It's a difficult conversation.
Yeah, also, I mean, in terms of scale, you know, when you talk about hierarchy, I mean, Gerard Sekoto, I mean, the name itself, you know, has weight. And then you have Dumile Feni.
And Pemba.
who's also has weight. And then, but now in terms of scale, his work is huge. Like he's probably three of the artists from the photo collection whose work was almost like 1 meter to 2 meters, you know, long. So it was really hard. I think we were cognizant of that, and we put Sekotos in that room because that room was not an attractive room. You know, it was not an, you know, it was just like, we couldn't do intervention like we did with the other three spaces. As you have noticed, this one, it's another small room where we can be able to paint and just like give it a facelift, basically. That room with Sekotos, we were hoping that we had to heavily decorate it so that people don't pay attention to the ugly walls. I'm sorry to say it's ugly, and the carpet. And so that was the way of basically curating that space specifically. We said we're gonna just bring these big names here, and just for people to just come and sit there and like you said, and just like be in awe of just looking at Sekoto from, you know, so close. So yeah, but in other spaces, I mean, there's other beautiful works by, and I'm biased here, by Louis Maqubela, like, Mike will know that. But yeah, so we were very much aware of trying not to put the Dumile Feni everywhere, you know, because we wanted, again, to bring other silence, I suppose, artists to be part of this conversation. Yeah.
So it's what was quite interesting, I suppose, because, you know, what we start to see here, I suppose specifically, I know the reason I sort of lingered on the Jackson Hlungwani sculpture, Christ as a soccer champion, is, you know, what's quite interesting is Jackson Hlungwani, in a way, and this starts to reflect, I suppose, broader museum practice that's dealing with these questions at the moment. You know, because museums and as public spaces and as spaces for for art are constantly under revision. So I mean, this work for me represents one of those kinds of strange dualisms where, you know, you would one would expect, given the history and the context, that this work would have been in the Forte collection, but in fact it was in the Stellenbosch University collection. You know, Jackson Hlungwani is you know, also in you know, due for up for revision at the moment, and starting to play more and more of a central figure as one of our artistic fathers. Just can you speak to me a little bit about, I suppose, orientating Jackson Hlungwani in this you know, quite now complicated conversation that we're having between these two university collections?
You want to go to now?
So these are the sort of subtle. Okay, remember we coming from the Triennale, and the tone has already been set by the other two shows. So us going into so from the vault, so the other two shows, it's mostly Black artists, right? So going into the Stellenbosch collection, there was this idea that we were only looking for Black modernist artists from their collection. And we said, no, we were just gonna choose what we think, you know. That's why we've got Joan Miro, we've got Eric Laubser, I think, you know, in the exhibition. And we just told them that, no, we're just gonna choose what we think, you know. Yeah, Cornelia as well is there. We're just gonna choose what, you know, like what we get attracted to, basically, in the collection. And Jackson Hlungwani, I suppose it was one of those names that, whoa, we almost forgot about him, you know. And I'm thinking back when I was doing my undergrad in fine art, that there was the entire year you are taught Western art, and then for a week, then you were only doing South African art. And the names of, you know, Jackson Hlungwani would be one of the few names that come up in those lessons of art history. And yeah, I just thought, why not include Jackson Hlungwani, especially from the Stellenbosch collection, because there was also the perception that you're only gonna find white artists in that collection. Yeah, so that would be, yeah. I don't know, Mike, if you...
Khanyisile?
Okay. Yeah. So I think it's also about the, you know, politics of aesthetics. You know, just everything that's been said is about politics of aesthetics, and to find a Hlungwani at Stellenbosch is fascinating because it shows there might have been a shift in the way of acquisition. You know, there was a moment that somebody was saying, hold on, let's take a look again. We might have missed something. They cannot obviously fill in all the gaps, but it's almost like a retake. And I think From the Vault works like that. You know, this is why it's speculative. It's just like we're asking people to look again. You know, and the moment of reparation for the artists who are no longer here is exactly that, where we are putting artists and artworks in uncommon categories, in uncommon ways of positioning them with each other rather than against each other, rather than creating these hierarchies that have been upheld by art history and the canon. We're saying, wait a moment, let us speculate. Let us speculate also from an emancipatory position and see what we come up with. If we're looking at the politics of aesthetics, you know, there are artists who have been put into polar opposites, who actually have been in conversation with each other for a very long time, as Gcotyelwa was making an example earlier. There are artists in terms of their practice, in terms of their
okay, if I can just jump in to finish your point.
Brushstrokes in terms of how they would come, but because, you know, yeah, I don't know, did you hear me? Or did something happen? Yeah. So, you know, and I think this is why the conversation From the Vault is about reparations and repatriation. And it's not always in the sense of like, we need to give works back, but it's also giving another look at works. And positioning works in our contemporary moment, that we have the ability to reposition works. We have the ability to imagine works and how, we put them in position and in conversation, rather than keeping them dormant in the vault, in sort of historical, archival ways of acquisitions. And this is what for me has been fascinating about that, from the vault exhibition. As you move around, your preconceived notions have to collapse. Your ideas of how artwork should be hung and who should be next to who have to collapse. And you have to enter and immerse yourself in what the curators have presented you with. And the one question I do have for both curators is that, how did it feel? How did the space feel spiritually? Given that, my belief is that objects have a sense, have a spirit that they carry of the person that made them and how they have been repositioned over time. So I'm wondering, what was the spiritual aura of the space during, the preparation of deciding where works are going, which works will be shown, and so forth?
Can you just to answer you briefly? So we divided the 4 spaces with according to different themes. So I think the green space, the theme was healing. So obviously that also linked to the color that we chose, and it would determine some of the works that we actually chose to put into that room. But back to your question again, because this was also a labor of love curating this show, because we lifted every work. Me and Gcotyelwa, we know how we lifted everything there. So I think back to your point of these objects that are coming straight from the vault, and you are physically lifting them and feeling them and the weight around them, and then placing them and then unwrapping them and then seeing them, and then comparing what you saw in the PDF file and then seeing the real thing, and then there's just like, wow. So we had some moments where what we had actually thought we would use seeing the thing on a PDF file and then actually unwrapping some of the work will be like, some of the work actually just chose itself to be in the exhibition.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was, we were having a conversation, Mike and with Stephen Seck. And I said, when the Forte collection arrived, there was just this presence about it, that you couldn't ignore, everything that you had decided, because we had more time to actually work with the Stellenbosch University collection, whereas with the Forte, it was about a week max. And when we started unwrapping and looking and just, there was just this presence about it, that at some point it was not about what we think, but our actions were somehow dictated by the spirit, by the work itself telling us this is where I'm supposed to be. We've done a lot of moving and shifting and just like we're taking it upstairs. Some of the works are huge, so you can imagine I'm not good at lifting up big things. Mike knows that. But I found myself having to lift up these beautiful, and it was just overwhelming for me just to come in, especially on a Monday morning, and these were all laid out. Thank you to Ulrich and his team. And we were just like, oh my God, what do we do? I think, so it was just like overwhelming. There was so much presence about it. And that's why when I speak of Louis Makubela, I get so emotional, because the work just moves me, there's something about it. And it's not just Louis, there's Ezrom Lechaye, and then you've got Cyprian, that's Cyprian, sorry, go back to that slide.
Let me go back.
The previous one. That's Cyprian Shilakwa's, the sculpture with metals at the bottom. So having to see those in person, to see the Sydney Kumalos, it was just overwhelming and beautiful. And we, like you said, Kanye, when we opened the show, that you felt like the ancestors were not ready. They had to take their own time to come to Stellenbosch, because there's just a lot that was just happening. We're not curating a show in a new, clean slate. There are certain things that are already in motion. spiritually, and that and I suppose that's why maybe one of the reasons why the work didn't come on time, but yeah, there was just this overwhelming presence. I suppose the aura of the work actually taking center stage in our final, I suppose, layout of the show. Yeah.
I suppose with that, as we sort of begin to draw to a conclusion, I think what's interesting for me now is ultimately the state of the exhibition and the state of your inquiry. So if we and I really like the curator's framing of the fact that this exhibition is indeed speculative, indeed asks questions more than it poses necessary answers and posing these questions, I suppose, posing these questions of the works to each other and we of the works. What are the works and how do the works now in this moment of history, when they've been produced all the way down a historical timeline, when they brought out quite literally from, as the exhibition title alludes to, from the vault, what impact do they have on us in this present moment and present point of time? I think it's quite interesting. So I think in a sort of in a way of closing thoughts, I think as the state of the exhibition, what is the state? Where is, as your experience of curators, where's your point of inquiry, and what state do you think this exhibition has left you in that sort of speculative inquiry that you speak about?
I think there's quite a lot. There's quite a lot. I mean, especially with the idea that Khanye and Gcotyelwa were speaking about, the idea of erasure. I think when we spoke to Stephen Gcotyelwa, there was this idea that maybe we should actually do more, and maybe somebody should actually do an academic study of actually writing around the 40-year collection and some of these obscure artists who are not really known. So I think what it has left us with is a sense of like there's work to be done. There's definitely work to be done. I will speak for myself. I think there's work to be done. And I think some of the phrases that we're putting on the wall, there's a phrase by Selby Mvusi, who was a 40-year graduate, which ends with, what is our time? The past does not really matter when the commitments to be made, when the commitment to be recognized and the question to be answered is, what is our time? And it speaks to what Khanye was saying, this idea of tomorrow there'll be more of us, and what is our time? It's almost like a duality between what does the work prompt us to do, but what are we as individuals, as human beings actually supposed to do in this sort of like post-colonial time?
Fantastic. And Khanyisile, how do you feel as curator sort of combining this amongst other elements in the triennial as a mode of bringing together all of these satellite institutions to form a single kind of speculative question? How do you feel that this exhibition has manifested the position that we find ourselves in today about reimagining our futures?
I mean, I think more than anything, the exhibition is asking us to be deliberate and intentional. There is a necessity for us to be intentional about the things that we say we're going to do, to be intentional about the theory that, we conceptualize so many things, but we're not intentional in our actions. And that maybe it's time to be intentional and deliberate. And maybe we have to move from a loving place, because if there's no love, there's no trust. Where there's no trust, there's no justice. And for me, this is something I kept on, moving around the work, kept on coming back, like be deliberate and be intentional in your action and your manifestation, not just in your theory, because we are not sitting with a theoretical problem, we're sitting with a lived experience problem. And that is something that, we wake up to every day and sleep with every night. And therefore, more intention, be intentional and deliberate.
I like that. That's great. Koetzee, what do you think, in closing, how do you feel, I suppose, the impact on your own practice of this museum, and how, because, I believe that we're, as a sum of our experiences, these kinds of events in our lives will shape the way that we proceed in future. what kind of insights has this helped you and sort of come to, and how do you think this will shape your curatorial practice or vision moving forward?
I mean, I've started becoming obsessed on the things that we don't see. You know, I was thinking about trauma, you know, and because my work, it forces me to work with objects, you know, things that people can see, things that I can see and touch. But I was thinking about trauma in a very immaterial or intangible way. How do we account, you know? And that's the question of healing for me, is that if we haven't recognized that, we have to be aware of the intangible. We have to be aware of things that we don't see. Because a lot of us are sitting with broken hearts, you know, with these traumas, because what has been criminalized or what has been penalized is the things that we can see, is the violence that is physical, right? But there's an intangible aspect of it that we're sitting with. That's why we've got so much trauma. That's why we're so triggered, because a lot of us, we're focusing on these natural or physical elements of the object. So what I've learned from this experience is, as I was talking, that for me, there was this other presence about the objects, and I couldn't ignore that kind of presence, you know. And that's something that I would like to take with me to you know, going forward as part of my curatorial practice, is to not just focus on the object, but on the intangible aspect of it, because I think we still need to do a lot of work in terms of that, you know. And I think the likes of Selby, they're not talking about the physical time that we see, you know, they're talking about a spiritual time that we really have to connect, you know. The works of Den Rahwate, for example, you know, it's very spiritual, you know. So it's not long about the physical object. Yes, they are important, but we need to go beyond the physical. We need to assess, you know, the intangible aspect of an object. I don't know if I'm making sense, but yeah, I've been kind of fascinated with this notion of the non-physical, the non-tangible, you know, the non-seeing, the non-visual aspect, because even our vision is kind of mitigated, you know. That's my job, you know. So yeah.
So I suppose, you know, one of my impressions of that as a sort of fellow historian, if I may be so bold, is to say, I suppose for me, the non-visual is precisely what this exhibition addresses. It addresses the intersecting narratives and those voices behind the scenes of the artist, and the stories and the spirits and the ancestors and the Madlozi that they come with, you know. And as you said, you know, there's something quite powerful about being in the presence of an entire collection of the University of Fort Hare. It feels like an army has come to town. It must have been, it must have been quite a thing to a logistical feat, second to none. You know, with our experience of moving works around, really incredible. So I think in conclusion, I just wanted to first of all, thank you all so much for your thoughts and experiences, sharing those today with us. And really, I think, you know, for the audience, you know, From the Vault is something I hope everybody would be eager to see. I think it's still open when museums eventually open. So please try and get to see it. Well, you know, hopefully we'll use this platforms like these to lobby for it being open a little bit further. Perhaps you know, we've got perhaps some of the right people listening, so we can see what happens there. Not to put anybody on the spot. I want to say thank you to Khanyisile and to Mike Takira and Coctelwa.
Yes.
I got it right. Yeah. And then I also just wanted to, we've got 1 or 2 people in the audience I wanted to just give a shout out to, talking about the intangible earlier. The intangible task from behind the scenes, you know, I think a shout out must be given to Francie Bayes. Francie, are you here? It's just, I think I'd seen her in the Francie, I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, yes, I am here. Thank you very much for a 1 hour.
Hi, Francie.
Hi, Francie.
Good. It's been an absolutely amazing experience working with the likes of Khanyi and Tigere and Gcotyelwa on something like this, because of the element of really making us rethink and reimagine our future. And it was very exciting. Thank you very much for your contribution in this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But what I can also say is from the University Museum side is that they have asked us whether we are willing to let this exhibition stay up until the end of the year.
Yes.
So all the other elements of the Triennale is going to have to be wrapped up once we can get back into our spaces. But I think this exhibition will remain open, and I hope that everybody will have the opportunity to physically go see it, because it really is a spectacular exhibition.
Yes.
Great, great.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's wonderful news.
That's really wonderful news. I see we've got a hand raised in the audience. So if anybody would like to direct questions, please direct them to the chat function, and then we'll, just so we don't have all voices jumping in over. So they said, oh, the virtual exhibition was on par. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cornelia and Irma. We've just got some thanks coming in. So I think there was Mr. Kilpit had raised his hand. So Mr. Kilpit, if you want to just drop a question into the Zoom chat we've got open, and then I think barring any more questions, I'm going to just give the final word to Professor de Villiers, if you're here, just to say thank you again for you know, I suppose the mission of the university to extend these kinds of collaborations, to open the archives, and to really, I suppose, be on the front line of, you know, historical collaborations that really go to not so much dwelling on the complexities of our past, but imagining anew the promises of our future. So that's I think, you know, I think that the tone and the spirit of this kind of inquiry, as Khanyisile so eloquently put it, is really, I suppose, a driving force of reimagining South Africa as a environment that we would like to see our children grow up in. So Professor Villiers, if you're here.
Yes, yeah. So thank you very much, Matthew. Thanks for the opportunity to showcase Stellenbosch University Museum and this very remarkable exhibition. Thanks to the curators for their very insightful remarks. I certainly learned a lot from this chat. I found it very interesting, and certainly the next time that I walk through that exhibition, when we eventually reopen, I will look at the works in bearing their thoughts in mind, and I'm very pleased that we will be able to have this until the end of the year. But thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Matthew?
yes, Francie, I was going to just say, quickly wrapping up, just give us some details of when level 3, 2, and 1 eventually roll on in. Where can people see it? Give us the details. Where should we go and have a look at it?
Can I look at my crystal ball to know when? At the University Museum in Reineveld Street in Stellenbosch. But I have to just wrap up from my side to thank you and your team from Strauss Co very much for supporting us in this venture. Without the support from Strauss Co, this exhibition would not be able to have happened. So thank you, Strauss and Co.
Well, I think it's an absolute pleasure, and you know, I think it's our way of participating. I suppose I believe we've got Frank on the line if he is here, because I think he would probably be better positioned to accept such a warm thanks. So, Frank.
Thank you, Matthew. Yes, Francie, thank you very much. Khanyisile, everyone else. It was really such a privilege to be involved with you guys, breaking molds, creating new realities, creating new insight, asking questions. I thought the exhibition had a wonderful energy. And as Khanyisile said, there were so many questions asked. And even as much as I enjoyed it that day, and when I went to see it once afterwards, after listening to all of you today, I realized I have to spend days in there and look at it again. And because that's the wonderful thing about art, it forces us to think, and it allows us to connect, and it makes us ponder and think about questions and reimagine and revalue. And I think that's such an important part of what not only this exhibition, but what the whole Triennale set out to do. So thank you so much. I'm sorry that life intervened, but I'm so happy that we can continue with this. And thank you to Wim and the people at the university for extending the tenure of this exhibition. It's absolutely worth seeing. So thank you, Matt, and thanks for everyone participating. And thank you so much for 90 odd people dialing into our Zoom talk today. It was really so nice to see you there, and we were privileged to share the insights of these amazing people and these amazing artworks with you today. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you so much, Frank. And just, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to play out with a short video of the exhibition, which we've prepared. So just as everybody's leaving, just to take a couple more minutes of your time, we've left you with this video of the exhibition. So again, thank you very much to everybody for joining us today, and thank you to Strauss & Company for hosting us. And we'll be back same time, same place tomorrow. Quickly with Wilhelm van Rensburg, with special guest Jack Ginsberg, talking about the artist's book and portfolios, and specifically some of the nuances around collecting those with reference to our online sale going on at the moment. So please tune into that tomorrow, same time, same place, 4 o'clock with Strauss & Company. And otherwise, please enjoy the video of the you've been listening to from the curators from the vault with Khanyisile Mbongwa, Mike Tigere, and Gcotyelwa joining us this evening. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and please be sure to join Strauss & Company in our round of Zoom talks tomorrow at 4 o'clock. We'll be joined by Wilhelm van Rensburg and Jack Ginsberg, speaking about the artist books and portfolios, and the collecting nuances about some of those fine items that we've got on our online sale. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Stay safe and see you tomorrow. Good evening.